Summer routines live or die by how easy they are, and honestly, if something takes too much effort, I'm out. That's why Groons is my go-to. It's my one daily pack of gummies covering my greens, vitamins, and minerals. Plus, it has 6 grams of prebiotic fiber, which is more than 2 cups of broccoli. No mixing powders, no giant pills, no hassle. I just rip open the pack and I'm done. They taste good and they make it easy to stay on top of my health, even when life gets busy. Save up to 52% with the code PODCAST at Groons.co. That's code PODCAST at GRUNS.co.
Before the virus struck, Michael Russo was becoming a domesticated animal. He had bought a house in the suburb. He was asking friends to come over because he pretended he wanted to see them. He really wanted them to work on his house. Many of them fell into that Tom Sawyer trap. And now Michael Russo has voles.
Yeah.
He also has a ringing phone.
Yeah. It's always right when podcasts start that usually stuff happens.
You just want us to know you're working.
Yeah, right. What was that? What would you ask about
voles?
Yeah,
I didn't know
what voles. Yeah, I didn't know what voles were until the other day. And then all of a sudden, I looked at all this damage in the backyard, and I thought they were moles. I misunderstood the construction manager, but apparently it was voles. So now it's like I just got to get my I got to get my backyard sort of resodded and all that stuff fixed up, stuff I've never dealt with. So, I just had somebody out and he's going to fix it all up. Great guy, but and put some drainage tiles in. Dealing with stuff that I never had to do in a 1,000-foot condo, that's for sure. 1,000-square-foot condo.
And we have voles here too, but we're like an association, so they take care of all that stuff. I had it when I lived in the suburbs, raising kids. We had voles all the time too. So
yeah.
Michael Russo, he's just like you. He deals with real world problems at home.
Yeah. We have an association too, but it's just for landscaping and snow removal. There's sort of a subject to trying to understand our little documents to see if I'm on the hook for this or if the board will. We'll see, the association. So we'll see. It's open to interpretation.
This is the Russo Suhan Show, the Russo Hockey Show. We've been calling it lately, part of the TalkNorth.com podcast network. If you'd like to advertise with this show or the network, you can email me at jsouhan@talknorth.com. Please follow us on Twitter at TalkNorthPod. Check out all the shows, including the new Gopher Hole content and all the new outdoor content. We continue to expand the network, even in difficult times. We do appreciate the sponsors who keep us going. Grey Duck Vodka, Twill in the Dining Galleria, Tony Hoagland, your State Farm agent in Champlin. And keep in mind some of our other kind of on hiatus sponsors, Tin Shed and Savage, Fixology Repair. We do appreciate working with all these people, and we want everyone's business to survive this period of time. Let's get to a little kind of hard news. The Wild have made some scouting decisions and revisions. Can you get into that for us?
Yeah, it came really out of the blue yesterday. I mean, obviously there are scouts that contracts are up, and usually the way it works is that you work your final draft, and then in the 4 or 5 days, if that after the draft, you're sort of informed by the GM that you're no longer going to be retained and not re-signed. And then you've only got a couple days to try to find a new job for next year. We saw that with Paul Fenton, his first draft down in Dallas. Immediately after the draft, he let go a number of Wild scouts just completely out of the blue after their meetings. What made the timing here odd is that it's happening before the draft. So yesterday, Bill Guerin actually had the 2 scouts that he let go, Ernie Vargas, who's been here for almost 20 years, and Darren Yapik, who is what makes this kind of a big-time news, is that he was the co-amateur scouting director for the Wild. And he had them take part in, the way I understand it, is that they took part in the early meetings yesterday via Zoom were part of it like nothing was going to happen. And then right after the meetings, Bill informed both of these scouts that they would no longer be retained. And I think the big reason for that was if he was going to if he didn't want them to be part of the draft process today and tomorrow, they're going to start to work on their final list. And I don't think he wants them to be privy to proprietary information. I'm just guessing on that based on the timing. And so whatever happened yesterday, both Darren Yapik and Ernie Vargas were told that they're no longer employed with the Wild, and their contracts are ending obviously June 30th. So, what makes this very, very interesting is that PJ Fenton, who is the co-director of amateur scouting, is apparently going to sort of run the draft with Ricard Pearson, their director of European scouting. That's at least what Bill Guerin told me. Now, some people have told me that Tom Curvers is actually going to be the one that's sort of organizing the draft and running the draft table, which, he's the assistant GM of the Wild. If that's the case, he has done it before in Phoenix, but it would be surprising to me that is the case, just based on the fact that, Tommy is obviously the assistant GM. He's the Iowa GM. He has not, as far as I know, done amateur scouting. I'm sure if this is the case, he's been catching up via video scouting and things like that. But as far as I know, he hasn't done amateur scouting all year long. So if it is the case that he's sort of going to be running the draft, that would be very, very interesting. But again, according to Bill Guerin yesterday, PJ Fenton and Ricard Pearson will be sort of the co-draft table runners, you could, so to speak, here if we have a draft in June or later in the year. And draft table is an interesting term right now because, it's obviously cliche running the draft table, but there's no technical draft table. The NHL are going to do a virtual draft this year, almost certainly, kind of similar to what they saw with the NFL. And so they'll be the two guys in charge.
Should we be surprised for any reason that PJ Fenton is maintaining a prominent position in the organization, given that his father got fired?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I think that a lot of people do think that he's a good scout, but again, I mean, this is going to be his second year really as a full-time scout with an organization. He's going to essentially run the draft in both of them. So, I think it's surprising. I'm sure he has a good amount of term left on his deal based on the fact that Paul's the one that hired him and did his contract. So that could be part of the thing here too. But look, Bill Guerin and Paul Fenton are friends. And so, maybe there's a relationship there. Maybe, Bill Guerin has really analyzed the organization here the last 8-9 months that he's been employed, and maybe he's just come to respect PJ, or maybe he's going to let PJ get through this and then make a decision there as well. Who knows? I mean, Billy Guerin, who is willing to be upfront about a lot of the reasons for a lot of the decisions that he makes. This was one where he just really declined comment yesterday on the questions that I asked as to why the decisions were made, other than to confirm to me that they did happen when I found out, and to confirm to me, at least what he said, is that PJ and Ricard Pearson will co-run the draft. But as I hear, I mean, I have conflicting information that, Tom Curvers is sort of the person that's going to sort of be in charge. We'll see. But, it is ironic, Jim. I mean, that Paul Fenton was the GM of this team. I think that he always wanted PJ to run the amateur scouting. I think he always wanted Dean Evison to be the head coach. He obviously wanted Kevin Fiala to be the superstar. He hired this front office, and now all of a sudden Bill Guerin's in that driver's seat. And as of right now, he certainly looks like he's retaining Paul Fenton's entire front office. I think there's a lot of respect there that he has for Matt Sells and Chris O'Hearn and Tom Curvers. And obviously Dean Evison's the coach of this team. Fiala's become a star, and PJ's running his second draft, and the only one not getting to watch it all up close and personal is Paul Fenton. So there's definitely an irony to all that.
Absolutely. I have another question about the scouting staff and scouting in general. Do want to thank Grey Duck Vodka. Grey Duck Vodka is a proud partner of the Russo Suhan Show.
Minnesota has always been home for me and my family, and truly, I am so proud of everything about this state. This is Carly Zucker. I love celebrating everything unique about our state, and that includes the best vodka, and that's Grey Duck Vodka. When you head to the store, remember Grey Duck Vodka is locally made, locally owned, gluten-free, and most importantly, a company that gives back to the community. Thank you for choosing Grey Duck Vodka and supporting local business.
We do appreciate Grey Duck and all of our sponsors. And hey, buy local these days. Buy local. Take care of your restaurants, your bars, your local companies that are keeping people employed. So, when I was a beat writer, I talked to scouts all the time, scouts from the team I covered, scouts from other teams. In baseball, the great thing about baseball is you're always around scouts. You didn't even have to work. Football, you're always trying to get people on the phone. Baseball, if you just knew where to stand in the stadium every day, you would end up with having 8 conversations with scouts. So I love scouts. They're some of the most helpful, best-hearted people in the business, but it's a brutal job. You can do your job well and just be out because of regime change. Do you think these changes are just because Bill Guerin has his own people he wants to hire, or do you think they were more, merit-based?
Probably that he has his own people. I don't know. I don't want to even guess because I know that, look, Darren Yapik and Ernie Vargas are really respected people and have their own lives and are trying to figure stuff out. Ernie was more, I believe, on a part-time scale. The other thing that you said about scouts, not only did they work their butt off and watch tons and tons of games, and that I will give PJ Fenton credit, is he watches a ton of games. They don't make a ton of money in most cases. A part-time scout can make anywhere from between $10,000 and $25,000, pretty much. But it is, it's an interesting job that these guys have. It's a passion for the sport to be involved. Pro scouts have a much more glamorous lifestyle than amateur scouts that are going in places in the middle of the night and not staying at the greatest hotels and driving in snowstorms and where, Ontario or Saskatchewan or Alberta or whatever, in the hearts of Europe, to go find a Kirill Kaprizov, you got to scout him in tough places throughout Russia, that type of thing. So it's not the easiest lifestyle by any stretch of the imagination. It is interesting, scouts. Like when I was I'm really tight with a ton of pro scouts because I see them all the time. Really, we don't get to see amateur scouts the way that we used to. When I covered Florida, I used to cover the prospect tournament. I used to cover prospect camp. They'd have a whole prospect camp before training camp. You go to training camp, all the amateur scouts would be there, and then you became really, really tight with them. In Minnesota, it's different. They're sort of in and out. They pretty much always sit with the GM in camp. I don't go to Traverse City, so I don't really get the ability to really develop a relationship with those guys. And it was always my choice, by the way, at the Star Tribune, not to go to Traverse City, and I've kept that here at the Athletic. I could go to Traverse City, and frankly, if a Kirill Kaprizov did go, I would go, even though the Wild are actually out of Traverse City. We're going to be out of Traverse City this upcoming fall. Who knows what kind of prospect tournaments will even take place now? Probably none. But the reason why I didn't go is because in Minnesota, you had so many of these guys back that it was the perfect opportunity to really catch up with guys before training camp, because training camp is so slow now that so short now, comparably to years and years ago when, training camp could last almost 3 or 4 weeks. Really, I stay here. I kind of bank a bunch of stories to write during training camp. And so I just decided not to go to Traverse City. So that's really affected my ability to even become tight with a lot of the amateur guys.
Yeah. Logistics really matter when you're dealing with scouts. Again, I got to know tons of pro scouts covering the Twins, but the amateur guys were great to deal with whenever you got a hold of them because they're so passionate about their sport.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, what really reminded me, it's funny you asked this question because the other day when I was writing about Kirill Kaprizov, I was looking up this guy that the Panthers took in like the late 90s, early 2000s, named Vladimir Sapoznikov was his name. He was a defenseman they took in the second round, and he was from this how would I describe it? Well, actually, let me Google it. It was a uranium city in Siberia called Tomsk 7. And he was from a place called Seversk, and it's what they call a closed city in Siberia. Like literally, there are gates around this city. It's kind of like we'd see in some of those old comedy movies. Like what was the movie with not Stripes, but what was the other movie that took place in Siberia with maybe it was Stripes with John Candy and Dan Aykroyd and all them.
I'm blanking.
Yeah. But anyway, it's like that. And so I was trying to look up this story, and when I found this story years and years and years ago, in there I did a sort of a scouting story, and I had so many of these amateur scouts quoted in the story, and all these old cool names from the Florida Panthers. I interviewed a amateur scouting coordinator named Brent Flair in the story. But all these old school amateur scouts that were like famous former hockey players and longtime scouts, and they were all like sort of, I wouldn't say buddies of mine, but great relationships. You caught up with them throughout the year, and it kind of made me realize that you don't really have those same relationships with amateur scouts these days. Was it Spies Like Us? Could it have been Spies Like Us? I'm not sure.
I'm looking up movies that had Dan Aykroyd, and it might have been Spies Like Us. Yeah,
it might have been. But yeah, I mean, so that's where he was from. And Tomsk 7, by the way, Severisk is not very far from where Kirill Kaprizov is from.
Interesting. Let's get some Twitter questions. Actually, we're going to talk about Kaprizov, and then we're going to do some Twitter questions. Do want to thank Twill in the Edina Galleria. Obviously, you can't go shopping for clothes these days in the Edina Galleria, but when the time is right, keep them in mind. I found I'm wearing two things during the quarantine. I'm either wearing sweats or I'm wearing my Twill clothing because it's so comfortable and wears so well. TwillMN.com, Twill _Edina on Instagram to get a great idea of their inventory, everything from comfortable socks to high-end suits, sporting goods, stuff you can wear playing golf or hanging out on a boat. All my golf shirts now are from Twill. They have the best clothiers. They will custom fit you if that's what you want. So again, everything in my closet these days is pretty much Twill. Check out TwillMN.com. So last week,
by the way, it is Spies Like Us, and it was Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd.
Got it. Okay, that's why it didn't pop up in my search. It was an amazing thing, wasn't it? Just the churn of comedians and Saturday Night Live personalities, and just how many low budget comedy movies they cranked out in that era. Because that's what it was. It was like Animal House. You go back and watch Animal House like right now, it looks like they spent $18.62 to film it. It was like a college. It was like some college kid with a handheld and John Belushi just doing crazy stuff. It's like it's not even an attempt at high end filmmaking. It's just like, let's get these funny guys together and something will happen.
Well, SNL used to be so much better than it is today.
Yeah.
And all those guys were, and gals were just absolutely epic. I mean, some of the movies that they put out, some of the comedy they put out, I find SNL now just to be absolutely awful. Like, I find funnier skits done on Twitter by random people than I see on SNL these days.
Well, I also think that I think there are so many other ways for comedians to make their way in the world now. They don't absolutely have to go to some place like Saturday Night Live to get discovered. They can get discovered by putting out, their own YouTube video, or there are ways of going viral now. Where back in the day, you really did have to move through the hierarchy and kind of catch somebody's eye on Saturday Night Live to get a movie deal. Now, if Jim Gaffigan, he did a couple of, he became popular in clubs. All of a sudden he's has his own TV show, his own comedy specials, and he's in movies, and he never even had to think about going to Saturday Night Live.
Well, the early cast of Saturday Night Live is definitely way before my time. That was like the Dan Aykroyds and the Gilder Radners. And
I grew up with those people.
John Belushi and people like that. But, to me, I grew up in sort of the Billy Crystal, Marty Short type SNL days, and to me those were absolutely like must watch every Saturday night. You watched it live, and you're right. I mean, all of them went on to just make really funny movies. I thought comedies back in those days are so much better than the ones you see for the most part now. Pretty much everything. The Young Frankensteins
I think it was because Blues Brothers. It was much more about the writing and the personalities than about plot or trying to make any kind of a traditional movie. I mean,
find me a comedy now that was as good as like stuff like Fletch and Caddyshack and Revenge of the Nerds and those type of things.
You don't. And again,
I remember when I was a kid, I used to watch all those Mel Brooks movies like a gazillion times.
I think Young
you know,
Frankenstein was the first time
Yeah.
I ever realized that you could watch like a comedy movie and actually have it make you laugh out loud.
Yeah, my brother and I knew all the words. I still
Yep.
remember, all
Knockers.
that. Yep, exactly.
So tell me about Kaprasov. You
Yeah, I
mentioned
mean,
last week.
it's exactly what I remember on last podcast. I said that don't expect him to sign tomorrow, meaning Friday, and he is not. And it's not going to happen anytime soon here until the NHL. One, he needs to hire an agent. That would make things a lot easier. But two, I mean, he needs to know if he could play this year, and if he can't play this year, if all of a sudden, because again, if they have a season this summer, they're going to push next year back to probably November or December, and if all of a sudden he can't play for a long, long time, that really could affect his decision to maybe stay another year if the KHL starts on time, and one can assume the KHL is going to start on time. So. That's the big thing. Again, he has made it extremely clear a gazillion times, even as recent as yesterday with a podcast that he did with Nikolai Habibulin, that he's ready to come to the NHL. But right now, he's in no rush to sign a contract because he wants to see what's going to happen with him.
I'm going to thank our final sponsor, Tony Hoagland, your State Farm agent champion. We're going to go through a lot of Twitter questions on a lot of different subjects. Tony Hoagland, Hoaglund, handles my insurance and Michael Russo's insurance.
Every team knows that the two-point play can be a winning move. That's why State Farm agent Tony Hoagland and his team are here to help you go for two by combining your home and auto insurance. It's a great call that saves you time and money. So go for the win and score savings by combining your home and auto. It's just another way we're here to help life go right. Call State Farm agent Tony Hoagland at 763-421-4900 or online at champlaininsurance.com.
All right, well, let's hit a bunch of Twitter questions today. From Tyler Scott, what is it going to be like covering games from home?
Well, that's not necessarily true that's going to happen, but I mean, it's definitely a concern. No, I think this whole thing to return to play is just so still up in the air. I know the league is intent on doing it, but the one thing that they've got to figure out and really articulate to writers and fans and the average citizen is testing. If it's true that they are going to have to constantly test athletes and they're going to have to constantly test people around the team, whether it's trainers or security people or food prep people or coaches and GMs, and then the offshoot of that are reporters. One, they have to justify why somehow professional sports is getting unlimited amounts of tests when still there's a lot of people that can't just make a phone call and get tested right now. So that's the other thing, and is how are you going to do it? Are you, just the constant testing and testing and testing. That to me is the biggest issue that nobody has to me articulated. I mean, are these tests even going to be available for them to constantly do? So there's just such a laundry list of things. It's like, we did an anonymous poll at The Athletic the other day where we talked to 57 players, and I talked to a ton of them. And, a couple of the players said to us that, like, look, a couple that actually felt, the majority wants to play. But the couple that felt they should just cancel the season aren't just being jerks. They're just like, look, why are we trying to piecemeal something together where we're going to get absolutely almost no revenue, and it's going to cost an absolute fortune to house us and isolate us in hotels and feed us for endless amounts of months and weeks? Why don't we just concentrate on trying to make next season perfect instead of all these other issues that could come up when guys are clearly going to, test positive for COVID at times? And there's just so many questions that, that you just do not know the answer to. Again, my biggest issue is that next year, I mean, the AHL season is going to be canceled here in the next week, maybe in the next couple days even. And the question is, when can they start up? I mean, AHL is gate driven. You cannot run a team without losing $1 gazillion if you're going to have with fans not in the stands. So if you don't start next AHL season on time, where are all these players going to go? I mean, where are all these college players going to go if college teams don't start right on time? Where are all these Canadian hockey players going to play juniors? They can't all just exodus and go to Europe because, one, it's not, there's import rules there. And even if they relax import rules in Europe, that's not fair to European players that's their only place that they could play professional hockey. So my biggest question is, what is going to happen next fall if the NHL does start, either in September or October, because they're not going to come back now, or they're going to start later in the winter time. Where are the expanded rosters going to come from? If you're an NHL team, how are you going to afford them under the cap? Because I got to think you need to have some sort of taxi squad available in case guys get sick. They're not going to come back in the wintertime and just say, all right, if somebody tests positive for COVID, we're shutting everything down again. If they're doing that, we're never going to play again. We're never going to have sports again. So there's going to need to be some sort of taxi squads. But then again, how is that fair? How do you have 10 guys just sitting there just practicing all year? What is that doing to their development? Do you want Capo Kakinen just being a practice player? Do you want Alex Havanoff just being a practice player all of next year? Jerry Mayhew just being a practice player? Again, prospects throughout the world. How is this going to affect their long-term development? There are just so many unanswered questions right now because we just don't know. That again, you just sometimes I get why the league is intent on trying to piecemeal a final regular season and playoff games, but a couple of players had said to me, why don't they just take a pause now, try to figure out how to make next season perfect, answer all the questions now, and try to figure that out. I don't necessarily disagree with those players.
And it's also interesting too. It's like, I think so many fans, to me, it's another example of how diehard fans tend to be more diehard about needing their sports than even athletes, because athletes, it's their job, and they want to make sure that they're treated well as employees. They want to make sure they aren't going to get sick. They want to make sure they're not going to be bringing the virus back home to their family, or that they're going to get quarantined and not be able to see their family. It's always easy for the fan to just stomp their feet. But
they've got to, what you just said of bringing things home to the family that's the big thing here, is they've got to figure out a way to make this safe, because you also don't want professional hockey teams or professional baseball teams or football teams or whatever being responsible for another outbreak. And it could really, really happen. I mean, I did this story on Kaprasov Countdown, the Twitter account, the other day, and Justin Backey, who I know listens to the show a lot, he's a full-time emergency department technician, and at one point I just started asking him about his job and if he's dealt with COVID and things like that, and how he's got a young family, 2 kids, a third on the way, and he was saying that when he goes home, his only goal is to make sure that he doesn't bring whatever he had at the hospital into his house. So he does what you do, he probably strips down in the garage, jumps in the shower right away, obviously washes his hand a gazillion times. But that's the thing here, is that when, to get back to the person's question that asked about what's it going to be like to cover games at home, that is the big thing here, is that you have 23 hockey players, maybe expanded a hockey team like 30. You have, a half a dozen trainers between medical and equipment. You have team services people. You have a coaching staff that's 6 or 7 deep. You have a front office staff that's 6 or 7 deep. And then let's just say they decide to add the media here. Now you're talking about, at least 3 beat writers that are around the team a lot more. The Fallnesses, the Dan Myers, the PR people, all that. And so now you easily have 60 or 70 or 80 people around the hockey club. And how do you make sure that everybody is completely healthy, but also not being responsible for making somebody else sick? It's like I've said a lot during this pandemic. I know that 100% I could take the stay-at-home order really seriously and be really, really responsible myself. But if I go out to the store, I don't know what that person's doing and who that person has been around and been around and been around and been around. So that's how outbreaks start here. And so, again, I'm not saying that I trust me, I want to get back to normal. I want to get back into XL Energy Center and cover real-life hockey games and, not do stories on invented I'm working on a couple of fun features right now, but they're manufactured stories to make sure that readers of The Athletic have some cool content to read. And so trust me, I want to get back, but I also want it to be done safely. So then come whatever week or whatever month, whether it's this summer, this fall, or this winter, we have a second wave of this thing. And now all of a sudden they just say, all right, we're stopping again. Everybody's quarantined again. Nobody leave the house. And so it just seems like a lot of these leagues are being very, very short-sighted to that.
From Steve Hoagland asked about scouting. I think you already covered that. It was a good question, but we'll move to Jared Mealy. Has the NHL brought up any ideas how to involve fans in games that are played without them in attendance beyond showing the games on TV? It seems like it might be a good time to try something such as virtual reality.
Yeah, I mean, other than making the players a lot more accessible, I mean, as you can see, I'm not exactly sure how you would go about making fans part of it if they're not allowed in the arenas. But I do like the way that the league and the players have all embraced trying to make themselves more accessible to fans. I mean, the production that the Wild did yesterday, the Born to Be Wild video, where a bunch of players saying, I mean, it's just absolutely well done and well produced, and that was an idea that I hear came from Craig Leopold, by the way.
Wow.
And it was just well produced. And just really entertaining. I mean, you look now at the Instagram accounts of guys that have just started to, really let their personalities shine. I mean, perfect example is Jared Spurgeon. Jared's been here almost 10 years now. He's 30 years old. He just signed the richest contract in franchise history in terms of AAV. And fans are finally getting to know what we've all known around him, that he is a hilarious, fun, great family man. I mean, his Instagram account is much follow each week, each day. I mean, he's embracing it. And he's finally done this, and I just think it's awesome. Brad Hunt started up an Instagram account. I mean, Zach Parise does not say no to anything right now. It's unbelievable the amount of things that he has done for this league, and Zoom calls and podcasts and all sorts of stuff. I'm working on a fun story it's sort of an evergreen story, which is why it hasn't run yet, that I'm going to run hopefully next week. Where I've talked to a lot of these players, from Stahl to Dubnyk to Stalock to all these guys, Spurgeon, Parise, Suter, about what it's like to basically be in a quarantine like it's the off season, and teaching your kids, school and things like that. And some of the anecdotes are absolutely hysterical, that especially that guys like Dubnyk and Spurgeon have dealt with back in their home base. So, I think that this stuff is that's a way to bring fans a part of it. But look, if fans can't come into arenas, there's not many ideas that you could do to bring them, feel like they're a part of it, so to speak.
From our friend Pooks, miss seeing him at the live shows. Has any member of the Minnesota Wild, other than Bill Guerin, been in contact with Kaprizov just to get to know him and make him feel a little more welcome and comfortable once he's able to head over to Minnesota? Hope you both are doing well. Thank you. We do appreciate it.
Not that I know of. I mean, the Russian scout definitely converses with them and things like that. But as far as I know, it's pretty much just Bill Guerin. Obviously the Wild have a couple Russian prospects, and Kovanov, who I don't know if he knows Kaprizov real intimately, but Sokolov apparently was friends with him as well, so maybe that's part of it. I don't know how much I don't know how much the Wild would want Sokolov giving any endorsements to Kaprizov, since they've never really given him, not that he has deserved it, but given him a true shot yet.
Right. Stefan M. also asked about Kaprizov. I think you answered it from our friend Bill. With the draft likely moving to June, do you see the NHL allowing trades for players not currently on NHL rosters? What other rules could the league allow to help with the impact in both short and long-term team construction?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. There would be no player trades, at least NHL player trades, at least the way that I've read the memo. And so that stuff would have to wait until a quote-unquote transition offseason, whenever that begins.
Johnson from Wisconsin asks, how will the draft in June affect the Pens pick that the Wild are owed?
The Wild would get the 24th pick, is pretty much what Bill Guerin told me, which makes sense. Again, that's the easiest of the dozen or so conditional draft picks, conditional trades that the NHL is going to have to figure out, potential solutions to. The Wilds and the Penguins is the easiest. I mean, the trade is literally, if the Penguins miss the playoffs this year, Jim Rutherford would have the opportunity to make the first-round pick that goes to Minnesota next year. Well, right now, the Pittsburgh Penguins are in a playoff spot, so right now they're locked at 24th. And I've got to assume that Jim Rutherford is just going to say take the 24th this year, because who knows what happens next year? They might miss the playoffs, and now you're giving the Wild a potential lottery pick. So it absolutely, to me, this is a total non-issue. It's obvious the Wild are going to have 2 first-round picks in this year's draft.
Carson asked, how much Starbucks have you consumed during COVID?
Not a lot. I was there for the first time the other day in probably 3 weeks. I've made a lot of coffee. Um, I can't remember the name of it. I can go on my Amazon real quick, but Josh Cooper, or one of our LA editors, recommended a coffee brand to me and said that I wouldn't regret it, and I bought it, and it was unbelievable. But I have so much coffee that I didn't reorder it, even though I finished it in like 3 days. It's called Kicking Horse. Kicking Horse Coffee.
I'll also, hey, Berry Coffee sponsors the Roy Smalley Show on the network, and I've got my machine from Berry Coffee and my coffee from Berry Coffee. They do their own roast. They roast it locally, so it's not on a shelf or in transit. They just get it. They deliver it right to you. It's the best coffee I've ever had.
Why didn't you get me a machine? Who do you have to know to get some Berry Coffee in a machine?
I guess you have to know me, and you have to kiss up to me in the right way, and that just hasn't happened.
Damn it.
The Athletic has a do-over series. This is from Ralph Wiggum. What would be your choices for a Wild do-over? Not trading Gaborik, any draft choice, Parise Suter deals, trading Barker or Pominville or Dimitra, and can Jim do a Twins take? What's your Wild do-over?
Well, just remember that every do-over that you do, which is the fun part of doing these do-over exercises, and I probably should have gotten into it, and frankly, I still can. I just don't need to do it during our blitz week of doing these do-overs. Remember, every one that you do over has 10 other things that it affects. So,
yep.
If you don't make the Brent Burns for Charlie Coyle, Devin Setaguchi, and a first-round pick trade, then the Wild are re-signing Brent Burns at a very exorbitant contract, a lucrative contract, and that would take them most likely out of signing Parise and Suter, or maybe even both Parise and Suter. Now, maybe that's a good do-over or not, but you be the judge. But yeah, for what Brent Burns has done, winning Norris's, being just a gazillion point guy from the back end, that would probably be my biggest do-over. In terms of other do-overs, there are tons. I still think the Marty Hansel trade was absolutely terrible.
See, that's what I was going to bring up.
Worst trades that the Wild have ever made. The
that's
Nick
the one
Leddy
that
trade
jumps out to me.
Yeah, to me, the Nick Leddy trade was a bad trade. There's no doubt about it. It was Chuck Fletcher's real first significant trade. It wasn't his first trade. His first trade was his first trade. He acquired Kyle Brodziak at the draft in 2009, and then they got off to a horrific start in 09-10. And I think we were coming back from Vancouver, and I landed, and they made the Chuck Kobasu trade. That was his first real in-season trade. The Nick Leddy trade, which was that year, we were walking down the street, you and I together, when they made that trade. I think I did a holy to you. They traded Nick Leddy for Cam Barker. Nick Leddy and Kim Janssen for Cam Barker. Absolutely god-awful trade. But it's not one that just severely debilitated the franchise. To me, Brent Burns, that's a game changer, losing him. And the Marty Hansel trade really affected the Wild's prospect core for a long time for a player that never saw how he was going to fit in. Marty Hansel, to me, has always been one of the most overrated players that I've ever watched. And I'm still to this day shocked that the Wild gave up so much in that trade for him.
I'll do a quick Twins take. I know everybody wants to say it's David Ortiz. I don't think, knowing David Ortiz and having covered him closely, I don't think he becomes the hitter he became without the shock to the system being released by the Twins and being on the market and nobody being willing to pay him more than $1.5 million to be a backup first baseman on a one-year contract. I don't think David Ortiz does all the things that made him a great hitter unless he had that shock to the system. So I'm going to say the Twins had a chance to sign Miguel Cabrera out of Venezuela as a high schooler. Terry Ryan had it all lined up. They had the papers drawn up and everything. And the ownership at that time, which I believe was still Carl Pohlad at that time, said, nope, we're not making any money. We're not going to spend money. And so the Twins go just for a very small amount of money, could have had Miguel Cabrera under wraps, and he would have made a huge difference in the franchise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
From Harold Johnson.
Doubt. One other thing on the Hansel deal. That was 2017, right?
Let me check. Was it that recent?
Or was it?
I thought it was earlier than that.
No, I think it was 2017, 2016,
I'll look
17. It up. Hang on for a second. The reason why I wanted to make a point, but I want to give you the facts before I make the point.
It was.
It was on September 26, 2017.
Yep.
Right before, the bye was, the players had just come back from the bye. On December Sorry, did I say December? February 26th.
February.
So on February 21st, the Wild lost to Chicago at home 5-3, and
I was
Jonathan
sitting next to you during
Toews
that
had,
game.
Yep, he had 2 goals and 2 assists. I believe. Let me just look it up. No, sorry, 3 goals and 2 assists.
Yes,
5 points.
He dominated the game.
And I'm convinced that Jonathan Toews is the one that was the precursor to that awful Hansel trade. I think that the Wild really loved their team that year. They really felt they had a chance to win a cup. I mean, Chuck Fletcher said it when he made the trade. And all of a sudden they go and play the team that had just, that kept on eliminating them in the playoffs. And they watched the fact that they didn't have another center that could check their top 2 lines. And that Koivu was slowing down and all that type of stuff. And I think when Toews lit them up, it sent the organization into a panic because the trade deadline was really a day or 2 after they got back from the bye. And I felt like they needed to get a center 100% to check, 2 or 3 centers to make sure they had 2 or 3 centers on their roster that could check other teams in the playoffs. And I'm telling you, I just still wonder if the Wild win that game against Chicago or Toews doesn't light them up going into the bye week if Chuck Fletcher doesn't overreact and make that just, terrible trade.
Yep. From Harold Johnson, if the draft goes on and no draft day trades can be completed, how much does this hurt the Wild?
That really, first of all 31 teams are in the same boat. And, the goal is that, or the belief is, and it was stated in the memo, the theory, I should say, it was stated in the memo by Bill Daly because a lot of teams have brought this up, that this is the time that a lot of teams reset their rosters. And, if the Wild want to go out and trade a Brodin or a Dumba for a center, that it would happen at the draft and things like that. And, Bill Daly's retort to that was that there's still going to be an offseason transition where theoretically there could actually be more action in the league because teams are going to be so up against the cap, especially if the cap isn't flat and the damage to this business causes the cap to even go down a little bit, that there could be potentially more trades. So, this is not a perfect world. Billy Guerin is not his first draft time as the Wild GM is not a perfect time for him to take over in that situation. And he'll have to adjust. But so we don't know how it's going to specifically affect the Wild, but there is still going to be an off season at some point where Bill Guerin can still try to make deals. It just won't be in the context of a draft where you can maybe throw picks in there and things like that.
Thanks to our producer, Brandon Morton. A couple more Twitter questions. Thank you for listening to TalkNorth.com and The Russo Show. From Brett McKenzie, how often do Russo and Simonette FaceTime or Zoom these days?
Say that again, sorry.
He asked how often facetiously asked how often you FaceTime with Dave Simonette.
Oh, I have not. I've watched a couple of his Instagram concerts, though. They're awesome.
Erica asked about the scouting staff. Paul Pedro about Kaprizov. I think we've covered those already. Let's just throw it to you for a final thought, Michael, on anything you like.
Trying to think really what's...
Well, let me throw this angle at you because you got into the difficulties of resuming play, and just to put a point on that, one of the big questions our country is going to end up facing is, do we put professional sports leagues ahead of average citizens when it comes to testing? In other words, do teams get tested when everybody gets tested, or do we decide that sports are important and more important than the average citizens, and we find a way to test them before testing is available to the mass public?
Well, I think that's going to be the big controversy when all these sports come back. Is the only way that they're going to be able to do it is if they somehow have at their disposal unlimited tests, and not just do it once, but constantly do it. I mean, there was a video on the other day that I saw on Twitter of an American that's playing in baseball in South Korea right now, that every single day that he shows up to the stadium, he is just getting accosted by a nurse, taking a cotton swab and just throwing it deep upside his nasal cavity and way into his tonsil area and all that type of stuff. And I have read that our testing is going to be a little less invasive, that they're starting to figure out ways to test that they could just do it where it's not, taking essentially a long cotton swab and sticking it way up your nasal cavity and making it painful every day. But they're going to need to come up with thousands and thousands and thousands of these. Who's doing it on a daily basis? Who is responsible for getting tested? Do you have to get tested every single time that you go in and out of an arena, in and out of a hotel? I mean, it's just going to be absolutely constant. And it's not just the 23 players or the 30 players if it's expanded. It's going to be everybody that's around it. So, to have this many tests when the general public might not have that many at their disposal is going to rub a lot of people in this country and in Canada the wrong way. And that is going to be the next big issue that nobody from the league seems to want to address right now is, you could come up with every single criteria met. Lots of ice, making sure that these locker rooms are sanitized completely, making sure that people are quarantined, making sure that the food people are being quarantined and things like that. But the one thing, that the bus drivers and the buses and all that type of stuff, transporting these players. But what people have not brought up yet on how they're going to return to play is the amount of times that these guys are going to have to get tested, how quickly they find out, and all that type of stuff. And then the other thing is just the general thing on how the heck do you play a sport like hockey without breathing on each other, spitting on each other, sharing towels. This is a sport where there's no way to social distance on the bench, on the ice. Your visors get all perspirated. You can't wear masks. This is just there's just so many questions right now that have yet to be answered by the people. But as I said on the last podcast, I talked to a PJ, and I don't know if this is since out, that I talked to a PJ golfer that there's like 36 pages of criteria that's going to need to happen for golfers to basically play sports when it comes to testing. Essentially, if you, one of the things that I heard that's in there is that if you show up to a golf course and you do test positive, that you are essentially quarantined in that city for a couple of weeks. That's the type of stuff that also need to be answered. So I've got to think that what the NHL and their health department, their disease control people that they're working with, and the health people and the doctors that they're talking to are putting together just an endless amount of criteria to get this game back on standing. And still, we're talking about, as the president likes to say, an invisible enemy that's not just going to stop based on the fact that the NHL might have 50 pages of criteria to keep people healthy.
Yeah, it's going to be a long haul here. We'll try to keep bringing you interesting stuff, both in our writing and on the podcast network. We do appreciate everybody who listens. Tell your friends about it. This is a good time for people to start listening to podcasts to kill time and hopefully be entertained. Thanks again to our producer, Brandon Morton, and our sponsors. We'll talk to you next week.
Pretty little city built on a hillside. Music in the bars and fire in the sky. We went to the beach and it was covered in ice, and I used to call it home. So much coming out, there's nothing going in. I know that you feel like you're never gonna win. Oh, but the world won't forgive a winner.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So, Brandon, if you could do some seamless surgery. But, Brandon, do you mind to edit this? Brandon, are you there?